Hello, and welcome to the Arrow Video podcast live at FrightFest 2020 with Sam and Dan. My name is Dan Martin, special effects artist and podcaster, and I am joined, as ever, by my beautiful co-host,
I'm Ashurst, and I'm a writer, I'm a director, and I'm very excited to be here, part of FrightFest at home. Now, normally when we do these live episodes, we talk to directors and actors, but this year, because we can beam to anywhere in the world, we thought we would celebrate some of the Arrow superstars. So we're going to be bringing those on later. But before we do that, Dan, how's your FrightFest been?
Yeah, good. Novel in its format. Less drinking than previous years.
Much less drinking, yeah.
But yeah, it's been nice. I'm glad it was able to happen under these, this new world.
And what have you seen that you've liked?
Well, I talked about a couple of my favorites on recent episodes of the podcast. I really liked 12 Hour Shift. I thought it was a really fun sort of like genre mash, like a good dark comedy, which is a hard one to pull off. I think something that's genuinely like got tension and comedy that lands. I like that. And then the other ones are horror comedy as well. Actually, it's the Australian sort of like semi-Brexit horror Two Heads Creek, which has got some great fun and some nice like sort of like big gore as well, which is always fun. I feel like that would have played well late in a big screen full of people, but I could imagine that.
Totally. And yeah, I also like 12 Hour Shift. That's a great one. I loved Clapboard Jungle, which is a really great film for any aspiring filmmakers out there. And yeah, there's some good ones still to come. Blinders, I enjoyed. And the closing film, The Swerve, I definitely recommend that people watching this watch that. It's kind of, imagine Todd Solondz directing The Woman. That's sort of what you're in store for there. And yeah, contains probably the best performance of the whole festival. It really is something. So The Swerve, I recommend that. Now, before we get to our guests, Dan, we have a competition running, don't we?
We do, because we have a chat system in place because of the online nature of all of this. That gives us an opportunity to have you write in your questions as we go, rather than having to pass a microphone around. So yeah, if you've got any questions for us or our guests, send them through, and then the best question from each of the guests that we have will win a copy of the new Pitch Black release from Arrow. Either Blu-ray or 4K, whichever is your preference.
Yeah. Cool.
So, yeah,
all right. Well, shall we bring on our first guest? It's James Flower. Very excited to speak to James. But before we do speak to James, let's have a relevant clip. Love it. And let's bring James on. Where's James?
Hey guys.
Hey,
Hello, James.
Yeah,
man. I feel like I should applaud that trailer. Just astonishing.
that's that's Jack Whiting from Arrow, who's our secret weapon when it comes to these great trailers like that.
So good. And James, before we go into the interview itself, do you want to tell the audience watching about your role for Arrow? What is it that you do?
So I'm one of a few people at Arrow who we're called the producers. So essentially, when Arrow acquires a title, when it's bought, the rights are bought from the producer or from the studio that owns it. It's then handed to us as producers, and we are then in charge of essentially conceptualizing the release and kind of making it happen. So we commission new artwork. We look into what new extras need to be commissioned or what old extras need to be licensed, and we kind of just, again, we start from nothing and we make it something. We make the releases happen. So for better or for worse, that's been my responsibility on Gamera and Pitch Black and a few of the other releases that hopefully people are excited about at the moment.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And I'm going to start with that Gamera box set. It is an astonishing release.
Thank you.
Now, you weren't a Gamera fan before you started working on it. What was that journey of discovery like for you?
No, I wasn't. I'd never seen a Gamera film before the project was handed to me, which was at the beginning of 2019. So, at that point, I was working on Arrow's release of RoboCop, and that was kind of taking up pretty much it took up a huge chunk of my time last year doing that one. And so I got handed, this project to do a complete box set of Gamera movies, these 12 Japanese monster movies that I'd never seen any. Not only had I not seen any Gamera films, I hadn't really seen that many Japanese monster movies, to be honest. I'd seen the original Gojira from 1954 and a handful of others, but not much else. And I'm a big fan of research and really getting stuck into finding out all the ins and outs of a project and what's come before and how we can best that to make the definitive version of make sure the Arrow release is the definitive release of that, and that whatever comes after has a even tougher time meeting that standard. And the tricky thing with this is that it's not just one film, it's 12. So I mean, that's a huge amount of I probably spent a solid week just familiarizing myself just with the series, and God, it took even longer than that to be able to do things that fans probably take for granted, like being able to name all the films in sequence and things like that. And they probably seem pretty basic, but it took me a while to get there. And our secret weapon on this all the way through has been the artist responsible for the artwork on the set, Matt Frank, who's a guy from Texas who kaiju fans have kind of known for a while for doing Godzilla comics and all sorts of things. We approached him, and he was already a huge Gamera fan, so he leapt at the opportunity to do it. And he came to us with this great kind of Rolodex of contacts and all these ideas of what we could do. And our ideas for it initially were kind of much smaller. It was kind of just going to be this sort of standard box set where each disc was going to have 2 films on it, and it was just going to be a much more modest affair. But as the research grew and as we saw more and more of Matt's artwork, it became quickly clear that that wasn't going to be enough. It had to be something bigger and better. And particularly when Criterion released their Godzilla set at the end of last year, that's when we got the confidence to say, okay, we can do something more with this. And eventually it mushroomed in size to become the beast that has come out in the last couple of weeks and has taken up a huge chunk of people's shelves when they've got it in the last couple of weeks. So this big cereal box sized thing.
That's amazing, and that's really interesting. So the decision to go big was inspired by Matt's artwork, and extra stuff like the poster, the comic, and all of that stuff.
It was certainly a huge. It was something that really galvanized us and made us think, oh, okay, there's something that could be done with this that's a bit more special than what we had in mind originally. A few things happened. We found out we could license some of the old Gamera comics that had come out before, particularly a 4-issue series that came out through Dark Horse Comics in the mid-90s. And once we got those, it was like, okay, this thing needs to be a certain size in order for people to read it. I mean, we've had kind of comics in some of the smaller ones before, but I think, and not only that, we also had Matt, he had also done a prequel comic called The Last Hope, which this has the first English language printing of it. It's this kind of 15-20 page prequel to the Gamera series where you find out Gamera's origin. And it was like, okay, we need this thing to be X amount of size to be able to read it properly. And we kind of looked for inspiration, and we're looking at the Herschel Gordon Lewis set that Arrow released a few years ago, and other things like the Criterion Ingmar Bergman set, and thinking, okay, what if we did it that size? And and it all kind of came from there. And the great thing about something like this is that you have 50 plus years of franchise history to draw upon and kind of take on as inspiration. And at that point we kind of decided, okay, let's go big or go home, and that became our mantra pretty much through the last 6 months or whatever it was of production.
Fantastic, thank you. And because we do the podcast every now and then, fans get in touch with questions, and we've had people in the States asking us about the Gamera set because it sold out so quickly. I know the speed of how it sold surprised you personally. What were your expectations in terms of sales, roughly?
Well, I mean, I've had a few people going, "Oh, you guys are so stupid. How could you not know this thing was going to sell out so quickly?" And it's like, well, Gamera is kind of the also-ran to Godzilla. He's the, that's no disrespect to the movies, but I mean, that's just the kind of general perception of, he's no one. I don't think anyone could have really anticipated it being this kind of huge word-of-mouth success. But and it's tough to know exactly even now kind of what that is, whether it's just the appeal of the package and just that thing of when you put in the work to do something that's kind of definitive or something that really stands out, it kind of makes people go, oh, okay, I'll take a chance on that. I'll do, I've not seen any of these movies, but it's a complete definitive box set. If I'm going to jump in, it might as well be with this. So, I mean, God knows what our expectations were. We thought we might do well to sell out of those by Christmas, maybe. But now we're kind of scrambling to get the smaller standard editions ready, because unfortunately, printing more of the big ones isn't really an option because they take a while to produce. They take a few months to manufacture. So by the time they would be manufactured, we might as well have gotten the small ones done already and given more people the opportunity to purchase an affordable set. So. So it's certainly surpassed our expectations, and it's been a big gamble that we're very happy to say has paid off.
Fantastic. And what is kind of amazing for me is that you weren't a passionate fan, as we said, but you've produced this really loving box set. I know because of the input from Matt, but have you ever worked on a movie that you didn't necessarily like, and what tricks have you learned as a producer to still deliver a set that fans will love?
You can't name it, but the brutally honest answer to that is, of course. I mean, there's plenty of films that it's not really been my cup of tea, but that doesn't really change the kind of the process of the questions that you ask when you're starting out on one of these things, which is, what can I do to make this the definitive release of this film compared to what's come out before? What are the opportunities with, who are there any cast and crew who are alive and who will speak to us? Is there any material that's pre-existing that we can license, that we can bring in? Or is there stuff that we can best, is there stuff that we can do better than? All of those, questions are the same. And, this is terribly unprofessional. I probably shouldn't admit this, but there are times where I might not have even seen the film until close to, halfway through production. Those times are rare. Obviously, I'm very careful to make sure and do my due diligence and everything, but it's it doesn't really matter whether you love or like the film. Obviously, if you do love the film and you kind of already have a pre-existing passion for it and a pre-existing knowledge of where to go, that's an advantage because it means you can get there quicker. But hopefully, if you do the work and you do the research, then you will find those opportunities anyway. And it's also a big help if, like Gamera with Matt, if you can find other people who have that passion as well, who can help compensate for whatever you may be lacking.
Fantastic, thank you. And we're probably going to do Guardian of the Universe for the podcast and talk about the whole thing. Use that as our way in. I know you're a fan of that particular title. What is it about that one that makes it so special for you?
It's a few things. Well, I mean, the obvious answer as to why it makes sense for you guys to do it is that it's a reboot, so it's the beginning of a new chronology. So for anyone who hasn't seen a Gamera movie before, that's probably a really good one because it's a slightly more modern sensibility. So it's maybe a bit less of a leap to than someone going and watching one of the 60s movies for the first time. Although the first Gamera film, I think, is actually really accessible and a really good jumping up point as well. But that Guardian of the Universe is sort of heralded very widely, as is all of that trilogy, what's called the Heisei trilogy, which is directed by Shusuke Kaneko, who Arrow fans might know from having directed one of the segments of Necronomicon, the Brian Yuzna horror anthology that came out a couple of years before. He did the segment with David Warner where he melts at the end, and it's all really cool. But also the Guardian Universe, it's kind of it's acknowledged as kind of a watershed film for the genre in its portrayal of the human characters and their relationships being slightly more complex than is accustomed for the genre, and the performances being better. And I think particularly the special effects by Shinji Higuchi, who went on to co-direct Shin Godzilla many years later. It's still men in suits, and they're still battling it out on miniature sets and stuff. So it's all the stuff that superficially would seem to be the same as all the kind of cheesy 60s stuff, but it's what is derisively known, if for people who don't know the genre very well, is that silly stuff. But it's actually done with a great deal of skill, and they're using what were then the most up-to-date special effects techniques, like motion control cameras and lenses that would give it a certain look to make it look like you were really there. They shot from low angles, so it felt like you were a human observer watching them. So there's a few different things that kind of make Guardian of the Universe, I think, a really good entry point for not just Gamera fans, but people who don't necessarily know the original Japanese kaiju films as well, who might have only seen the American reboots of something like Godzilla or that kind of thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And I'm running out of time, but I really do want to get onto the game very quickly, which you also produced, and we cover in depth in this week's podcast episode. It's another unusual limited edition. The film is housed within a hardback book about the film. Where did that idea come from?
So it's something that Francesco Simeone, who's one of our sort of the bigwigs at Arrow, who's kind of one of the sort of creative directors at the company, he's wanted to do something like that for a while, commission a monograph and kind of house the books in this thing. So full credit to him. The idea was his. And then, it kind of fell to me, well, okay, how are we going to make this happen? And kind of make this actually something that sort of feels substantial and, is worthy of not just a higher price point, but also people going, well, I don't want a book, I just want the film. Why are you kind of giving me this stuff as well? And the game was it was, amongst those other challenges was the fact that we couldn't have access to David Fincher. Unfortunately, he felt that he'd said everything he wanted to say with the Criterion edition 20 years ago. And I don't think he's someone who really kind of looks back on his films anyway. So there wasn't any question of us being able to get new access to him or do new extras with him, but fortunately there's plenty of material. So the book that's in there is it's half of it is this new monograph by Bill Geebury, who's done a great job of delving into the themes of the film and uncovering all of those layers. And the second half of the book are archival articles that we've been able to dig up that do have Fincher's input and the cast and the crews, and actually between those and the new extras that are on the discs, including the commentary by Nick Pinkerton that I know you guys were fans of.
Oh my God, good.
It's a really densely packed commentary. He really delivered. Nick did a great job. Between those, I think you've got pretty much everything that you'd want to know about the film.
I've got to ask you actually about that commentary because it is insane. Genuinely one of the best audio commentaries I've ever heard. How did it come about? How did you hire Nick? And how did you feel when you first sat down to listen to it?
Nick has been around for a while. He's very well known as kind of a critic in New York, and I don't think he's done a solo commentary for us before. He's done commentaries with a guy called Glenn Kenny, who's probably just as well known as another critic in New York. And Glenn wasn't able to do it for one reason or another. I can't really recall, but Nick, I was kind of not desperately searching, but trying to find a critic who A, really liked the film and I thought might be able to speak passionately about it, and B, who had some experience on commentaries, because that's often the balancing act when you're trying to find these people is, okay, who has a specialty in the subject and who can actually talk confidently for 2 hours plus about, not all aspects of the film, not just, you know, what else the actors have been in, which is kind of sometimes on some of the lesser commentaries what you find it just tends to be reading IMDb, which Nick's commentary certainly isn't. And you know, as always with these things, it's kind of a wing and a prayer. You commission it and you hope it's going to be great, and you know, listening to it, he absolutely delivered for sure.
Yeah. And Dan, do you have any questions for James?
Well, I was going to dip into our viewer questions, the one that's on the bottom of the screen at the moment, which obviously refers specifically to The Thing, but we're talking about a big Hollywood movie insofar as The Game. What's the difference in approaching rights for something that's maybe a little more niche, at least in the West, like the Gamera films, versus something that was such a kind of a tentpole movie when it was first released? You have to deal with much bigger studios.
I'm going to have to kind of plead a little bit of ignorance in terms of the process of getting the rights, because that's another person's job. So our head of catalog at Arrow is a guy called Kevin Lambert, who has relationships with a ton of different companies and studios and is great at getting these deals. And he's a big Japanese cinema buff, which was a huge part of the reason how and why we got the Gamera series. So in theory, I don't think it's necessarily tremendously different in terms of working with Universal, who are a studio that we have, you know, Arrow has a tremendous relationship with, and they've been a great support on us on not just releases like The Game, but Pitch Black, obviously, and Flash Gordon as well. So they are responsible for licensing us our first two big 4K releases, and to have them as a supportive partner as a Hollywood studio is great, because, you know, as more and more studios kind of merge together, or they, you know, have different plans for how they want to exploit their content, it's, you know, getting more and more difficult to find and build some of those relationships. So the one that we have with Universal is, you know, a really great one, and we've got some great Universal films coming up. We'll say that more. Yeah. But in theory, you know, as far as I'm aware, the relationship with someone like Kadokawa, who are the corporation that bought out Dai, who are the company that produced the Gamera films, is not that different. It's all about building relationships, and, you know, they give us what's called an avails list, which is a list of the titles that they have available to license. Might not necessarily be all of the films in their catalog, but all the ones that are available and that they're willing to license us. And, you know, we look at that and we compare that with, you know, we do research into kind of comparable titles and how, you know, assess how we think it will perform. One of Arrow's big things is trying to get films where we can license them for both America and the UK, because those are territories that we can both release in. And it's, you know, sometimes that means that there are some titles that we can't, if we can't get both of those territories, we might have to skip it, because, you know, it won't necessarily work just as a single territory release. But, you know, the flip side of that is having that both of those territories offers a greater cushion for something like Gamera that could be seen as a risk, but we're able to take that and do a bigger and better release than we would have done otherwise. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, that's, yeah. It's unfortunately people, I mean, some people quite understandably think it's just as simple as, you know, we pick films that we like and then we release them. And unfortunately it's not that simple. It's a lot more complex, and there's a lot more that goes into, you know, goes into an Arrow release, and, you know, picking what films come out. It's, you know, if only it was as simple as we like that film, let's release it. Otherwise we would have released The Hitcher or something else a long, long time ago.
An often requested title.
The most requested, I'm sure. Yeah.
And yeah, we've had a couple more questions for James come through. What's the next one, Dan?
It was, here we go. So George Kenwood Parker asks, what's your philosophy with the designing and directing as far as the aesthetic goes on a given release? Do you feel a specific piece of artwork or tone of writing could go too far and then impose on the film itself?
Good question, George. Well, I think the guiding principle, I think, is generally that you can't please everyone, so don't try. That's kind of what I think the new artwork is probably the most divisive part of Arrow's releases and what we do. And I mean, it's kind of a no-win situation, because, you know, half the people, I mean, it's not half and half split all the time, but, you know, some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it. And, you know, when I started the job, it was something that was new to me, because, you know, I'd worked in sort of more conventional distribution where the marketing department might handle the artwork and the design elements much more than a producer would do. So it's something that I've kind of had to grow to become a bit more comfortable with. But I mean, part of that has just been realizing, look, it's sometimes there is a specific design strategy in place, but a lot of the time as well, it's just a gut feeling. What's an artist that's done a piece of artwork that you think is similar to how you kind of conceive it working out? Or sometimes you're fortunate to work with an artist that has a particular specialty. So Frank, who did Gamera, he's the best at doing giant monsters, and in fact I've got him doing another giant monster film that's going to come out soon as well, and it's exactly. So I mean, that's not to pigeonhole him, but he does a particular thing very, very well, and we'd be fools not to hire him for that. In terms of other things as well, like the booklet essays or some other extras where it might be seen that we're kind of editorializing on the film. I don't think anything this might be controversial and people might disagree. I don't think anything necessarily takes away from a film. I think that film always kind of is a standalone thing, and different people are going to have different takes on it, and just to confine yourself to just giving the history of that film and not necessarily delving to what some of those interpretations might be is kind of it's sometimes doing the films a disservice, but it's certainly cutting yourself short in terms of opportunities. And it's so in theory, no. I know kind of some people have been a bit upset at us for maybe that some people wonder if we're kind of pushing an agenda on certain films, which I'd wholeheartedly deny. But then I guess if you disagree, whatever that agenda might be, whether it's feminism or something else, then you're going to be more susceptible to thinking that that's we shouldn't have done that. But on something like the John Hughes films that we released last year, 16 Candles and Weird Science, that's one where I thought it was just a foregone conclusion. Of course, we just look at those films from a modern perspective, and we and I think the tone that the balance that we struck with those was kind of pretty much ideal in terms of it was generally very conciliatory. It wasn't slagging the films off. It was just saying, look, this was the time and the place where these films were made. So of course it's going to be like that. But there was a minority of viewers who thought, well, that's you shouldn't have to do that. I should just be able to enjoy these films, however I want. And to which I would say, well, you still can. You still have the opportunity of not reading those booklet essays and not watching those extras, and hopefully your opinions aren't so sensitive that they would really affect that much. But we're getting political here, guys. We should probably step away from it.
It's fair to say that. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, this happens on the podcast too. We can't help but discuss those kinds of issues, and we do get back every now and again. But the vast majority of people are up for hearing that kind of exploration. So I think it's
I think it's fair to say that the only agenda is to present movies in the best way possible with as much insight as possible, so people can look at it from all different points of view.
Yeah. Just for anyone coming in halfway, this isn't the World Beard and Mustache Championships, by the way.
And this is the last of the beards with regards to our next guest. Dan, we have another question.
So I mean, obviously you said you're not in acquisitions per se, but I do know that Arrow staff occasionally get to not request stuff. As you said, it's not a case of just picking films you like, but some titles have got to release because they were like pet loves of people at Arrow, and then they've become available. Is there anything that you're holding out for? Anything that you really would love to see get the Arrow treatment and done to work on personally?
God, I mean, there's so many. I mean, it's for all the hitch of being a running joke, of course we'd love to release that film. It's just a matter of who owns the rights to the damn thing and will they license this to us. And I mean, God, there's heaps of films. My mind's drawing a blank now. It's funny, even though it's a film that's had 1,000,001 releases in every single format in the world, I'd still like to see if I could do the definitive edition of The Evil Dead. That's even though it seems like such an obvious title, it's like, well, it hasn't had a definitive release, so how could we do it? And maybe there are restrictions that would stop that from happening at a kind of upper level, but I'd like to try anyway. But yeah, it's even though Kevin is the one who's acquiring the titles, he is very good at coming to us and bringing us these lists and saying, what do you guys think? Because we are a resource as well as a team. We have, between us a pretty wide knowledge of different types of films, and we can say, oh, okay, that would be really good, or that's a bit iffy. We probably shouldn't go for that for various reasons. So it's sorry, I'm distracted by the question that's come up right now.
I was thinking I might read that one to you in a minute.
Not as far as I'm aware, but who knows?
I keep laughing at them, and I worry that you think I'm laughing at your answers, James. I'm not. Brilliant questions. Should we move on to this question?
Yeah, well, obviously, films like Vinegar Syndrome in the States and some of the other cult labels do move more into the sort of the adult, or rather the adult films. Has there ever been anything sort of discussed in the office that was contentious for that reason, because of that content?
Well, I mean, we kind of, because obviously Arrow has form in it in terms of the more arty kind of erotica. So whether it's Borovchik or Tinto Brass and people like that, I think that it's because in the UK it's different from a market point of view, because obviously the BBFC have a wider remit, and it's because pornography can only really be sold in the UK under an R18 certificate, which is much more restrictive in terms of selling it. So it's completely infeasible from kind of a financial perspective. But now obviously we have the opportunity to release in the US as well. I don't know. I mean, horror and cult has kind of been our bread and butter, and it's been the stuff that we do really, really well. Well, not just horror and cult, but I mean, obviously a wide variety of films. Who knows? I mean, it's something that Vinegar Syndrome have done a great job of moving into that space, and I don't know. It's not my specialty, to be completely honest with you. So I can't really say.
The contenders I can imagine are those sort of Mexican horror films where they'd shoot the normal version, and then the actors would go home for the night, and they'd shoot loads of like pornographitic inserts so they could release two different versions.
Well, Italian films as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
The hardcore version.
And a great question from Andy McDonald. Which are your personal favorite Arrow releases?
Oh God, that someone asked me that the other day, and my mind drew a blank as well. I should really be preparing a lot more for these things. I think just as a fan, I mean, stuff like that Borovchik set where it came with a book. I mean, God, that was tremendous. And other box sets like I'm looking at my shelf for inspiration here. So the George Romero Between Night and Dawn box set, which is it's such three kind of key films in kind of his work that had really been given short shrift, and they were kind of revived and looked better than ever. To kind of be very indulgent and pick up for a couple of my own releases that maybe people might have kind of not necessarily had the opportunity to see because for whatever reason. Earlier this year, we released a new Blu-ray edition, or the worldwide Blu-ray premiere of Philip Ridley's The Passion of Darkly Noon, which is for those who don't know it or don't know Philip Ridley's other work, it's a very odd kind of American Gothic kind of fantasy horror story about kind of American fundamentalism, and it's Brendan Fraser is in the movie. He plays this kind of very tightly wound young Christian man who starts to feel desire for a woman played by Ashley Judd, and he becomes jealous of her and her boyfriend, who's played by Viggo Mortensen. So kind of a starry cast for a film like this, and eventually his jealousy manifests into kind of this rage, this violent anger that takes kind of explosive form, and the film starts to disintegrate around him. And it's a very cool movie, and one that I'd worked with Philip Ridley a few years before on a release of his film The Reflecting Skin when I worked at a company called Soda. And so to be able to work with him again on The Passion of Darkly Noon was a real treat, because that's a movie that had only had kind of crappy pan and scan copies before, and we were able to restore it to its full 2:35 aspect ratio and do these really cool extras and get Philip to do a new commentary. And so that movie came out at the beginning of this year, and it only came out in the US because unfortunately we couldn't get the UK rights, but it might be region free if you want to get it and you live in the UK. So that's a film that if people haven't seen it and they want to see something really cool and different from the Arrow catalog that I may or may not have had a hand in, that would be my recommendation, The Passion of Darkly Noon.
Fantastic.
Nice.
And yeah, I think that's probably it for you, James. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Amazing releases. And yeah, we look forward to what you do in the future.
Cool.
And we have our next guest, but we've got something else to do before we get to that. So, James, thank you very much. And Dan, over to you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Sam. September announcements are coming for October. Or rather, the October releases will be announced in September. Sam and I have asked again if we could break some exclusives. We're not allowed to. That's above our pay grade. But let me just say that we do have some, let's say, spicy titles coming up that will force you to debate 4K versus Blu-ray when it comes to seeking perfection in movie watching. Let's leave it at that. And talking of 4K, our next guest, who some of you may remember from the Arrow Insiders episodes of the podcast, is Nora Mckenney. And again, to lead us in is an appropriate clip, please, Mike.
Room service, motherfucker!
Hello, Nora.
Hello, Nora.
Joining us now. Yeah. Oh. Two people pressing buttons. That was my fault. Sorry, Mike. Hello, Nora. Thank you for joining us.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's nice to see you again. For people who don't know, and shame on them because you were on episode 51 of the podcast, would you like to tell people what your job title is and what that means at Arrow?
It means that I had to watch all the Gamera movies many times. No, yeah, it's QC, quality control, and production asset management. It's pretty much around the offering in QC, which work hand in hand, like the last of the line before the disc is uploaded to Sony and turned into a magnificent work of art. So we go through, all the specificity of offering, which is all the compression, like depending on how much assets we have on the discs. So it's all a matter of I don't like math that much, but when it comes to films, I'm okay with that. And it's, just make everything look good according to where the footage is from, the quality of the footage, if it's HD, SD, archive, super noisy, not noisy, it's just a matter of balancing what we put on the disc, and then to be the eyes that would be checking the disc. And for that, I have my assistant Alan, that Alan Simmons, that is also a big friend. Also, the eyes that have seen Gamera 12 movies. I'm just saying this because it was like the last beast of a box set that we did, but it was very enjoyable. But apart from having the song stuck in your head for the rest of your life.
Literally a beast.
A beast.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously with Arrow moving into 4K, I'm assuming that makes some changes to your workflow. How much have you had to address how you approach these discs? Does it give you more freedom, less freedom with these bigger size films?
Well, the problem is that it coincided with COVID, which is, when you have to work from home and download files, it takes a little while, depending what's your connection. And then when you talk about UHD, we're talking about double the size. So, it was not, I think we managed really well this transition. We did really well considering the situation that we had on our hands. And I'm pretty excited. I'm someone I'm still kissing my VHSs at night, so I'm not ready. I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to expand, let's say, because I still remember when I was already working in an offering house back in the day when Blu-ray was just a little baby. and many people just this will never stick on. It was always like this sort of battle of like the DVD purists that were already like the old VHS dudes back in the day, like, you know. And when Blu-ray took over, it took over. And now the UHD, I think, is here to stay as well, because it's just the way the technology is going. More people have 4K TVs in their house. The gear is going down. We're looking at also alternative brands that we can actually pronounce. And it's... No, it's getting there. It's getting there. And also the fact that, you know, when you do restoration and everything, you scan in 4K and you restore in 2K. Now it's going to be, you know, like we're going to just push the envelope a bit further and always push for the 4K restoration. And no, it's good to be able to revisit. And, you know, the thing also about the masters, the 4K, you know, we always get like, oh, is it a new Arrow transfer, or is it this, or is it that, you know? Of course, when we do the transfer ourselves, we're even more proud of like the product and everything. But for example, for like... something like Crush that is coming, you know, it was released by Turbine in Germany. They did this giant media book, very sleek looking media book. I really like the front cover, very very sexy. And the thing is, like, we will be sharing most of the assets, but we have more assets because we have to. We need to give a little extra cherry. But sometimes it's not just about the master being different or remastered. It's also about the compression. You know, it's about like where do you put your bit rate? Where do you allocate? What do you think is most important? What is what you want to achieve? I don't know where Turbine are making their discs. I never worked for them, but it's something that every disc will be always different, even if you have the same assets. It just depends how you treat the assets and how you actually allocate bit rate. You know what I mean?
Nice. Well, I was going to ask you about Crash. What was that? Was that something that you were particularly keen on as a film when you got to play with that in all its luxurious 4K?
I'm really looking forward to see until the end of this one, to take the baby to Sony. You know,
because it's still in production.
Oh yes, it is in production. Yeah. We're still working on it. Yeah, we are. No, it's a very, very exciting project. We have this little few extras that are very like it's a region B release. Sorry, guys, we didn't do this on purpose. So it's a region B release, but only sorry. But what to say? It's you know, it's the same master that's been approved by what is his name, Peter Shushitsky, the DOP.
Sounds right.
Shushitsky, yeah, is that it? No, it's looking great. I mean, when we received the master, I just had a little peek because, you know, for example, when you have an SDR master, what we use for Blu-ray is typically between 100 and 200 gig, whereas this kind of masters is more like reaching toward the terabyte, you know? We're talking about 800 gig or something like this. So it's also massive, you know, you open it and it's just so nice to see. Like, would you like to adapt to the size of your screen? Yes, please. You would just see like the corner of the image, you know, it's just absolutely massive. And I think, Crush is a very sleek and sexy movie. So I think it really deserved these details, you know. And I'm not going to say anything, but I can tell you there's more UHD titles coming this year that I'm super excited about, even more than Crash.
That's very exciting. You mentioned uploading to Sony. Obviously, Sony have their claws firmly into the HD production market. Are you guys expecting there to be like a big uptake in sales when the PlayStation 5 comes out and sort of puts those 4K players into people's homes?
Yeah, it will. It's the same way the Blu-ray happened, you know, when everybody was having a laugh, and then PS3 arrived, and that's it. Like, everybody is allowed to have like a player for a decent price, because it's also not everyone is so tech savvy, know what to buy, and Blu-ray players tend to be quite expensive or like very flimsy if you go for 50, 70 quid. You know, like really like weights nothing. You wonder if there's any hardware in it, you know. But at least with PlayStation, you know, it's very stable. Also, the engine that they use is really stable and good for grain handling. So that's why I still use a PS3 because I really like the engine for the Blu-ray. But yeah, of course, I'm going to have to go to PS5 afterward because there's a lot of little little things that are very specific in the way you do the disc as well. It's like just adding volume names, little stills and stuff that you only see on PlayStation, that you won't see on the normal Blu-ray player. So they have their little thing, and Sony is in the broth forever. I'm a Sony girl, you know. I still have my first Sony Walkman, my first Sony, you know. So it's just, these guys have been with me all my life. And yes, they are the mothership. They are the guys we upload all the projects to, and they really have their hands in it. And it's like a little trademark, like a little TM next to Blu-ray. It's like if you look with a magnifying glass, it says Sony, you know. It's just... But yeah, for sure, this PS5 is going to be the same way it boosted the Blu-ray with PS3. PS5 will boost the UHD, and it's not about a matter just of business. It just looks good, guys. It looks really good, and now as so many people are playing, I mean, gaming on 4K TVs and stuff. So it's just the next step.
That's awesome. A non Ultra HD, a regular old HD release that you've just worked on. Obviously, last time I spoke to you on the podcast, we were talking about Herschel Gordon-Lewis and the mammoth undertaking that was that. Now, not quite as well known maybe as Herschel, but the subject of this new box set, Bill Greffy, who's the box set's called "He Came from the Swamp," and he's kind of like a Bayou Herschel Gordon-Lewis. Awesome. I think the titles are "Sting of Death," which I think we've got a little clip for, which I'd love to show before we get on to the next, like discussing the box set as a whole. It's from like '66, Hook Generation, Naked Zoo, and Whiskey Mountain, which I'm guessing is your favorite because it's got hillbillies in it. You love hillbillies.
Nah, you know how much I love hillbillies, but I love sharks.
Yeah,
so
no, that's fair. That's fair.
I'm really looking forward to see Mako, to be honest. Yeah.
Nice.
No, this box set for me, it's a blessing. It's a blessing. Well, you want to show the Sting of Death?
Yeah, let's show the clip from Sting of Death.
Amazing. All of this out in the middle of the Everglades.
A scientist must work someplace. This lab offers deep Gulf waters a few minutes from here and swampy pools right outside the door.
This is where Egon lives.
What a creepy place to live.
Well, he likes it well enough.
What are those things in the tanks?
That is a fine collection of Physilia.
Portuguese man-of-war, silly. Some people call them jellyfish.
Never seen them before.
They blow up on the beaches sometimes. Sting like mad if you touch them.
Those tentacles contain a poison that's nearly identical to the deadly venom of a cobra.
You mean that little thing could kill a human?
Theoretically, yes. If properly administered, the venom in one Portuguese man-of-war could shock the average person's system enough to kill.
Egon, are you here, Egon? You girls relax. I'll be a couple of minutes.
I left my cigarettes in the boat. Be right back.
Oh.
I think one of the things that stands out. Oh, it's so good. One of the things that really stands out there is that for all its sort of like cheap 60s TV commercial aesthetic, that first shot's really quite nicely considered, like starting on the wide and putting behind the tank. Like, you know, he's got a little bit of skill there. How would you pitch him to someone who hadn't seen any of his work and you were trying to like talk into committing to this pretty weird box set?
First is like, I don't talk to you if you don't watch them anymore, and like, I don't talk to you anymore if you don't watch them. No, but it's just I love it. Of course, you pointed it's the HDL of the Everglades. You know what I mean? It's you feel there's someone that knows his business. You know, that knows how to. Okay, this not working. Okay, I'll make it work a different way. Let's do this movie. I like the energy that is behind that. And it's also, I feel it's like, you know, all these adventure books that you had for little boys. Well, like I'm thinking of this 1950s book, Adventure Stories. It's this feeling, you know, with the witch doctors, a bit of the zombie, a bit of a shark, a bit of bikini babes. You know, it's like taking the beach horror movies to a HDL tainted level, you know what I mean? It's really cheesy, but I love this like goody two shoes kind of character. Hey girls, hi lady, let me carry this for you, and then whoop off, she gets killed, you know, like and everybody dances the monkey, the twist, like everybody is so baff, and I like this. I guess just a token of a time, you know, that is for me very dear to my heart, because I grew up watching James Bond. I grew up with the adventure movies, and for me, this is gold. You know, it's like taking all the adventure stuff in the dirty side of it. You know, so I really enjoyed it. And when I saw the creature from Sting of Death, I was like clapping on my own. I was like, yes, more of this.
His flippers.
And I really like the fact that the image, you know, like the film damage is, of course, is indeed very present, because this is just like surviving elements. And so we have all the best surviving elements. So it's another like Frankenstein work that the guys did in restoration, which is crazy. And it's like to remind me of Herschel Lewis in like Whiskey Mountain is the Moonshine Mountain, you know what I mean? It's like it's so close and it's as damaged, I tell you. but it's really nice to have this. I think it's 7 films, and it covers like 10 years of his career, and from the psychedelic hippies, and and I love the art is the same whole box, you know. And it's just also there is this documentary they came from the swamp, which is where we got the title of the box set from, which is from 2009, and it's the same formula like HDL, because HDL we had the Godfather of Gore as well, so you could even start by the last disc if you want to actually know about the man, and then start with the movies, you know. Well, they're in chronological order, but it's that thing where it's really like it feels like the film school. It's like now you know the films meet the man, and once again he's collaborated to the box set as well. There's tons of interviews of him, and I think it's HDL is much more famous with Blood Feast was out there, but I can imagine if he didn't do Blood Feast, he wouldn't be such on the map. It's just because he arrived and he took the thing like hostage, and I think if Greffe arrived before him, maybe we know Greffe, you know, more than him. You know, it's but they're like fighting in the same arena, which I like a lot. I enjoy that.
Well, there's a lot of similarities, and if you like one, I think you're going to find a lot to enjoy in the other. Even though I'd say Greffe maybe a touch more wholesome than Herschel, particularly in Herschel's later career.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's How to Make a Doll is it's not Mako. Huh?
Yeah.
Question
Sam.
In from Craig Lawson, if that can pop up again. But basically, Nora, what's the hardest project that you've worked on at Arrow? There it is.
To be honest, Jodorowsky.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the Jodorowsky box set was a very, very long work. Yeah, it's a matter of, you know, approval and things, you know, because, you know, when we work with studios, and it's always another story. Like if you want for Universal, all these guys, you know, they have their path. They need to approve everything. So I think Jodorowsky was the hardest, because it was a lot of back and forth, and to be honest, it took 6 months of my life. But
wow.
When I see the finished product, I'm super happy, and I'm really happy we got to have this interview of Pablo Leder, you know, that Abraham shot in Mexico. I mean, we have some extras, some insight in there that is not available like in the other versions. And to be honest, the guys, the job they did at the restoration stage is stellar. But I think this was the hardest one, because it's not just the bow is not just on our side. It's like you have to satisfy, keep the quality high, and yes, just make sure it's the best, and not losing your breath over 6 months. You know, of like, okay, now let's watch Fando Elise for the 71 time. You know, like, and woo, you know, keep your eyes open. And it's a long process, but I'm very happy that this is out, and especially someone like Jodorowsky that is so instrumental with the midnight movies and like where we all come from, you know. And I mean, El Topo is my favorite anyway, so it's really dark in a way. But yes, it was a long, painful battle, but we won it, and I'm very glad it looks great.
Fantastic.
Awesome.
And one more question from Anthony. It must be great fun and satisfying restoring old movies and cleaning up the negatives, working on them digitally. You're giving them new life. What is your favorite part of the process?
The favorite part is, I guess, like James was saying about research, you know, it's when you don't know about a title that is coming to you through that door that you know it's already been worked on for months and months by people that know their thing. It's always nice sometimes to, especially because when you go to the QC stage or the offering stage, it's like really rehashing until it's perfect. So not only you didn't know that film, but you're going to get to live with that film for a week or two. So, you know, get over it. You know, it's sometimes it can be painful, but sometimes it's great. It's just like, wow, what a surprise, you know, like lately, I think one of our releases that I enjoyed the most in the last few months was Dream Demon. Because I had never heard of this movie, and wow, I see this. For me, it was like, you know, Kate Bush and Joe and Jet go on adventures in dreamland. Especially like the Kate Bush character is British, the Joe and Jet is American. They look so similar, and it's just a film that feels that it was made with the heart. You know, all the effects are practical, and it's shot in London, so it's like always so nice to peek at the outdoor shots and go like, oh, I see a plaque, like Northwest One. Oh, where is this? I mean, everything is exciting. I've studied restoration, you know, back in France, you know, and I love the fact as well that when you see something and you see a damage, you need to understand where it comes from. And you know this with research and knowledge, you know, of like, oh yeah, this looks like something that was introduced in the 90s, because in the 90s when they were mastering, they were doing these kind of things. You can see the touch. No, this is definitely film damage. This can be improved. This shouldn't be improved because you would destroy the integrity of the thing. So it's taking the decision of where is the balance of perfection and also age of the medium, you know, of where that thing comes from, and knowing where the source is, the quality of the source, and just give it the best representation on digital.
Fantastic.
Nice.
Do you want to throw in that last question, Dan, or?
I think I know the answer to the what's your favorite horror theme tune question from episode 51.
2000 Maniacs is, it's one of my favorite, but I have to say Spider Baby is very high there as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great tune
because it's really kooky.
Nora, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really nice to chat again.
Yeah, lovely.
Yeah, nice to see you guys.
Yeah, take it easy.
Well. Ciao.
See you soon. Yeah, so a little bit more news before we move on to our final guest.
I have a correction, Dan. I have a correction.
No. I was gonna
go.
I said September announcement for October releases. It is September announcement for December releases. So you just got a little bit more of delay gratification for yourselves there.
We will have to wait.
Yeah, as far as the October stuff goes, Arrow's social media channels are going to be having all of the October info coming up. Shocktober again this year is going to be really big. Whole month of special live stream guests, promotions, competitions, giveaways, all that kind of stuff. There's also going to be some big news coming on the Arrow Video channel for October. If you're already a subscriber, then you know what a great space it is with all the Arrow titles that are available there. It's really good value. But there's some big news coming on that front as well, especially for American and Canadian Arrow fans, which is very exciting. Sam, over to you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dan. Let's bring on our amazing next guest. It is Heather Buckley. But before we bring on Heather, let's have a look at a relevant clip.
Candyman, 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 Candyman. Virginia just looks so much like Rita Hayworth in this film. I mean, she looks so gorgeous. I love the way she looks in this movie.
And I've got to say, the thing with the slides in the wounds is actually a very Clive Barker touch. That was one of the things I was sure was his.
There was never a moment in which I knew with absolute certainty that the movie making was something that I was born for.
The Candyman, in a way, is a forgotten god who is the stuff of myth, the stuff of legend, and now he's fading away.
I love film that embraces images of stuff that looks kind of like me.
Hey, and yeah, let's bring on Heather Buckley. Hey, hello, Heather. How are you?
Hi, how are you guys? I miss you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's very early where you are in the morning, so thank you.
By rock and roll times, it's 8 a.m. So yes,
that's very rock and roll. And can you describe your role at Arrow for the people watching at home?
Oh, I'm a DVD supplement producer, so I help put together the discs and set up the interviews, bring them through post.
Yeah, awesome. And the clip that we just watched there, lots of extras for Candyman that you were involved in. But my favorite of all is that Clive Barker interview that you did. I hold that up as the gold standard of all interview extra material. How do you prepare your questions? How do you go into an interview like that and feel ready?
Well, I almost feel that it was a lifetime. So when I was a young girl, I was always a huge Clive Barker fan since I was 13 or 14 years old. I read Damnation Game first. I drew for the Clive Barker Appreciation Association. I drugged my parents to the Best Cutler Art Gallery in New York City to see all his strange, semi-erotic ink monster drawings. And he's always been a huge influence on my life. I remember seeing Nightbreed for the first time. So creating those M crosses on my mother's driveway. I mean, the first way that you approach an interview like that is that I already sort of had, I try to, it's like ask questions about, gather the wisdom, create a space as the moderator or the interviewer. I mean, if you're there with someone like Clive or anyone, is that you're just sort of there tapping the little boat aside just gently and then just giving them the full floor to blossom and talk about the things that they love and what influences them. And in turn, you have this great gold that will then, those stories influence the world, because that's what influenced me in helping be who I was, are these stories, these artists, the philosophy, their point of view. That's one reason why I do this sort of archiving.
Absolutely. And you are able to put your interview subjects at ease. With Clive, obviously, because you had that passion, that background, I imagine that was relatively easy. But when you go into a situation with the interview subject that is a little bit more difficult, how do you put those people at ease and get them to open up?
I actually had a couple, very few situations like that. Talk to them. I sit down and I sort of talk to them, not about the questions, but just sort of who I am in a very interesting way, and they're able to open up. But usually you just sit down and people are ready to tell their story. That's when I work on all these discs. It's like I was just there to set them up and make sure it happens, but it's truly their generosity. So.
And what about your own story? Like, how did you get on the path to interviewing all of these icons? How did you get into your job?
Well, what happened was I was in a car with Michael Felsher going to Horror Hound. So to back up a little, so I was in Michigan. I was going to travel down with Synapse to go to Horror Hound, and Don did not have enough room in his van, so he says, "Go drive with Michael Felsher." And so I was telling him about working on We Are Still Here, and there was this, everyone, it's like, I go to the Fantasia Film Festival, people should say I should be a producer. I go to, I worked on We Are Still Here doing special effects shop supervision. Travis thinks I should be a producer. And I was just telling Mike Felcher the story of like, because my background was in advertising, being a creative lead. And it's like, all these people keep saying I should be a producer. And Mike says, I have this Saw disc from Lionsgate to archive to talk about the anniversary. Would you like to do it? And it's like, that's incredible, Mike. It's like, I'm gonna try it for a few weeks and see if because I've never done anything like that before and see how it worked out. And I went, and after 2 weeks, and I said, Mike, if you don't like what I'm doing, you have to pay me because you're my friend, and I just, we're just exploring this. And then he goes like, Heather, I've never seen anyone produce like this before. And that is the first disc, and I think it's about 5 years ago that started me on this path. So I work with Mike from Red Shirt. I then worked with David from Severin, and then worked for Arrow, Vinegar Syndrome, and now a lot with Kino Lober. And a lot of it's researching, finding people, pitching, and make sure that these things get set up all over the world. Because again, these stories of filmmaking are critical, and the idea that they would be lost away and would have them archived is something that drives me to find to find everybody. But that's how it happened. And before that, I was known for someone who interviews for Dread Central and Fangoria. So I always had that background of just sitting down and hearing stories. I mean, my grandfather and my mother were old school sort of Polish American storytellers. So just to sit there almost as the student and just allow it to open up is something that I always love to do.
Fantastic. Thank you. And what's been your favorite project that you've worked on for Arrow? You're talking about, getting these people and getting their stories recorded. What's been a real sort of highlight in those terms for you?
I know we've brought this up before last year, but I will always say Slugs, because it's a film that typifies something, because I was working on it with Felcher and we couldn't find the FX guy right away. And he says, don't worry about it. We'll move on to other things. And I went, no, we have to find this guy. And so what I do is that I use my sort of like social media contact connections and, research, and try to find like, what is my path to these guys in Spain through a global genre network. And we were able to find him, and then two of the other members of the crew, they actually lived within one or two blocks of one another. And so we were able to load the Slugs disc with critical storytelling. We tried to find the mechanical slug head. I wrote letters to the director's daughter. We didn't get it, though. I just want the Arrow family to know that it's out there, but we just could not get access.
And on the podcast, we don't just recommend Arrow stuff. We also talk about other discs that we love. And so you mentioned it before, you work for other labels. What's the coolest disc you've worked on for a non-Arrow company?
Ooh, let me think. Because what could be cooler than Arrow, right?
Exactly.
I might say the special edition to Long Riders, because I was able to get a very important and critical interview with Walter Hill, which I conducted in Los Angeles, because it's the same thing with the Clive Barker interview, that I'll fly over from New Jersey to go do the interview in person. So it was very interesting talking to Walter about Westerns, archetypes, the failure of the masculine idea, and again get these nuggets of sort of like a broader philosophy, a broader inspirational philosophy. And the stuff that I learn a lot helps with my own work, because I'm a feature doc producer. So how all these folks have made films and listening to it firsthand, and their thinking, and I think it also helps me with my other work.
Fantastic. And your documentary, you had a documentary at FrightFest last year. Before that, you had The Ranger. What are your happiest memories of FrightFest? FrightFest in the flesh.
Well, hanging out with you guys, hanging out with Kevin and Ewan. Those are my highlights because I was very excited. Because it's like, do I just go to Leicester Square? Do I just go directly to the Arrow office and say hello to everybody? It was that. It was and then meeting you because we have a legendary meeting story at the bar.
Yeah,
like you're Heather Buckley, and we talked about sort of a cool thing that manifested into a future cool project. But I loved going to London for the first time. I was never there. Obviously, punk rock. I have a Byhawk, and just seeing London folks in their natural habitat helped me understand my gear, the look, the vibe more so.
That's awesome. Thank you, Heather. And Dan, do you want to ask some of these excellent viewer questions?
Yeah, I was just scrolling through them, and this was one that I wanted to go to, and Mike has read my mind. Chris Rushbrook asks, what difference do you find in terms of interviewing those involved in more recent films compared with people looking back on things that they worked on many years ago?
I find that there's no difference in the passion. A little note that I could give you is that once you're a producer on a film right now, or even 20 years ago, talking to the producers of folks of older films, that's still their film. And they'll try to connect you out to the director and cast. So I realize that the movies that I've produced, I shepherd them until I'm gone, because they still shepherd their film. It's pretty incredible, and talks about, the producer role for these movies.
Yeah, there's a reason the producer gets the Best Picture award. It's your film.
That's great. And we had another question from James Rodriguez earlier. Can we pull that up, Mike? Yeah, brilliant. Who has been the most charming icon you've interviewed so far, Heather?
Who has been the most charming? Because everybody is so good. I mean, for Kino, I loved interviewing Gary Sherman for Wanted Dead or Alive. I think he's great. He flew on over. I was gonna say one of my most important, I think one of the most important interviews of my life, someone who became my friend, was actually Joel Coleman for the MPI release of Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, because it was finding him sitting down in the auditorium and talking about shamanism, serial killers, Henry, the underground scene during the day. So that's something that one's very, very special to me.
That's fantastic. And you interviewed James Caan for Thief, is that right?
That was one of so I set that one up. So I'll tell to the folks at home. So I'm over in New Jersey, right outside of New York City, to shoot on these sort of budgets and all over the world. A lot of times I'm like virtual producer or virtual director. The first year that I was at FrightFest, I remember hanging out at the bar, looking at my phone, and then making sure like the shots and being available for a John Leguizamo interview for Kino, because you have to, because it's like Richard Belzer was in the south of France. And that was for the Puppet Masters for Kino. Even if you Google like videographer where he is in the south of France, you just, no one came up, and I went like, man, is this going to be the one that we don't get because I can't find a camera crew? But we were able to find someone close enough to travel to where he lives. So that's an early one that I set up. So a lot of that is like calling the reps on the phone, negotiating certain aspects, and then sending somebody else to go shoot that. So unfortunately, I don't interview everyone.
Right.
But if it's critical to the pitch that I be there, and I love them. For example, the Demon Night disc, I did fly to go interview John Schuck because he's one of my favorite character actors. And so we talked a little bit about Demon Night, but a lot of it was just sitting there and getting insights onto like how Robert Altman likes to shoot.
Wow.
Because that's what I live for. Are these certain like character actor reports? I think he said, I don't know if it made it into the cut, but some wisdom he gave. He says like as sort of like as character parts, when you go into the role, when you go on into the scene, you're trying to create a shorthand for who your character is. Also, because he's theater trained, he mentioned the importance, like the societal critical importance of acting and the vessel of storytelling. And with just Altman, a lot of his audio recording techniques. So a lot of his stuff, since it's not relative, falls on the floor. But I get to hear it.
Love it. And
a good perk.
Questions from the audience.
Yeah, someone asked. I'm gonna scroll up and see. I'm just gonna add this one, Mike. Another one. So this question is: have you ever asked for an autograph of an interview subject?
All right.
To blow that up,
yes, because I was going to say it could happen once. Yeah.
To widen it up a little bit, but I do want to hear that. Who has it been hardest to keep your cool around because you were so excited to be interviewing them?
Oh my God, that's easy because it's also very funny because I felt the whole team was that way when I did the Cabin Boy disc, like Chris Elliott. Because I said, like, guys, Chris Elliott is coming into the studio. Everyone has to be cool. Because he's too good. Because I love his work. It's Fucking Cabin Boy. And like Get a Life. Oh my God. So it's like everyone be cool. Chris Elliott's here. Too famous. So I was a big fan of his.
And was it him that you asked for an autograph from?
Actually, no. So I never ask for autographs. When you show up to these interviews, professional, not a fan, like Lee Marvin, ice kind of demeanor. But it was William Peter Blatty for the 9th Configuration disc that I asked him to sign actually in my Mark Commode book on 9th Configuration. Because that movie is one of my most favorite movies of all time. And I felt that I would never see him again. Which is true because we got that interview and then Mike got his Exorcist 3 commentary and then he passed away. That actually hurts a lot with the older discs. Is that once because I did commentary with Joel Schumacher and you spend that intense time like for 2 or 3 hours together and then they pass on. It's very weird to do stuff like that. So as I go back to that question, it's like a lot of the older discs. It's around that. Is that you spend that intense time, you get their story, and then a lot of the older folks say. But then you go like you've got it. You were able to sort of like archive, capture this diamond. So I sometimes get concerned when some of the older talent, if they pass, because I really just think it's like, oh, we need to archive this stuff. It's
Absolutely.
critical.
Is there anyone you'd really like to interview that you haven't had a chance yet? Anyone you're sort of looking for an excuse to go and talk to?
I try literally all the time to get an interview with Martin Scorsese. All the time. And it's like, Heather, it's difficult. And it's like, can we try? I think the first time I actually tried it with 9th Configuration, even if he could do an essay, because I don't think he's ever talked about the movie because of the Catholic themes in it.
Oh, wow. Well, one day, God, I'd love to see that. I think that could be it, unless we've got any more questions from the audience. Oh, there we go. What's your favorite Arrow release that you've worked on, slugs aside?
Slugs aside. I like the massive attention that I focused on the entire house collection. Everything has stuff. Everything has a lot of stuff. And the first 2 have feature-length docs. The world didn't ask for this, but we give it to them anyway.
The world.
Go, I need to know everything about Caterpuppy, and it's like, well, here it is. It's like that meme. It's like no one, all the work on the house disc.
I think that's kind of an amazing way to end. Unless you have anything more, Dan.
No, I think that's it. You've been incredibly generous with your time and information. It's been nice to have some insight.
Thank you, Heather, and speak to you soon.
Miss everybody.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye. Oh, that was lovely.
Yeah, that was great. I think we're kind of wrapping up, aren't we?
We are. This is it. This is the end now. Thanks to everyone who's watched. But before we sign off, we should announce some competition winners. Dan, who have you selected?
I've selected absolutely nobody. I want people who have asked a question to send their emails in, send a preference as to your format. I don't have a 4K playback system yet, but I'd be tempted to go for 4K anyway, just because, you know, embrace the future. But yeah, send those emails through to competitions@arrowfilms.co.uk and we'll get you out your format of choice.
Everyone who got piped through.
Yeah, everyone whose question got read out.
Brilliant. Excellent.
Thank you so much.
And yeah, you know, sorry for the nerves. We don't normally do this kind of thing. We're normally, you know, kept from the spotlight. So it's been really fun to do. Thank you so much for watching. That just came up is a deep cut FrightFest reference.
That was very good.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for the lovely comments, and we promise. Fuck, I messed up.
Promise, Sam. It's promise. We've practiced this for like 4 hours.
I promise. We promise to be more professional next time. Goodbye.
Bye bye.